Welcome to the first in my series of head-to-head, where I take two console ports and pit them against each other and compare the graphics, the sound, the gameplay, differences in levels, even the cover art in a battle to the death to see which one rules supreme. Every difference that matters will be on display, and this week it's the Turbo Duo versus the Sega CD with the mighty Lords of Thunder to see which one emerges from the mosh pit victorious. And to make things interesting, I'm going to bring out my metalhead buddies, Iggy and Ozzy, to go at it for a couple rounds. For those of you with the attention span of a goldfish, I pinned a chapters list in the comments so you can jump right to the comparisons. Now, if you know me and you've been following my channel, you already know that I kind of have a thing for this game. I know the game like the back of my hand, and I've beaten it every which way but loose. In fact, this is my original copy from when I was a kid. It even has the Game Dude sticker on the back from where I bought it. I've read a comparison or two online, watched a couple of videos in the past, and having never really played the port all the way through, I just kind of assumed it was reasonably accurate. It seemed detailed enough. But when I popped in the Sega CD version to play this week, oh man, did it blow me away. I couldn't believe the differences. Some good, some certainly not, that were completely never mentioned or glossed over in what I'd seen before. So I knew that there had to be a definitive comparison made between these two ports by someone who knows the original like the back of their hand. And I promise I will be absolutely as impartial as a turbo head can possibly be. Because to be honest, there are some things about the Sega CD version that I really like a lot. But what I can promise you is that the things you'll see in this comparison are things that you've never seen mentioned anywhere else, unless you've played it and seen it for yourself. Unless specifically noted, all the video you see here for both systems is using original hardware through my OSSC to make sure there's a fair comparison. If you're not familiar with the history, Lords of Thunder was originally a Turbo exclusive, and it was marketed heavily to help sell the Turbo Duo. They even got Tony Hawk to make a hilarious garage-style video showcasing the game. On VHS, baby.
Hey, excuse me, sir, have you played Lords of Thunder yet?
Huh?
Lords of Thunder? No?
It was the height of the console wars, and they did not mind ragging on each other to earn points and gain a following.
Would you consider ever getting a Duo because of that game, or?
Yeah, I think I would buy it. I mean, I already have Sega, but I would trade it in for this.
Yeah, no bad blood there.
What do you think of Lords of Thunder?
It's my favorite game. In fact, ever since my baby's been born, that's all I do.
But once the marketing mistakes and lack of support started to sink the Turbo Duo in the US, they decided to release the game for the Sega CD as well. Kind of a blasphemy at the time, honestly. It was analogous to releasing Sonic Adventure 2 on the GameCube when they already knew the Dreamcast was on its way out. The developer needed to make their money back, as opposed to it being a system seller and an exclusive to help sell the console. Be that as it may, Lords of Thunder is iconic. And I've never given the Sega CD version a fair shake, until this week that is. Now with most games, you'd normally start with the graphics or the gameplay, but I like to start with something that defines that particular game. And with Lords of Thunder, without question, it's the raging soundtrack. So let's start there and bring out my metalhead buds. Dude, the turbo version rips! It's like my garage band on the weekends. Sorry, Sega bud, but your version sounds tame and overproduced, like they sold out and they took it to a studio.
I beg to differ, mate. Your tunes are alright, but it sounds like amateur hour. Did you go to the flea market to find your mics and record in a room full of glass? There's just way too much trouble, mate. It's harsh on the ears. I can't even hear a lot of the music because the gain on the sound effects is turned up so high. We went back and we re-recorded the tracks to give them the treatment that they deserve.
And you ruined it, man. Lords is supposed to be raw and brutal, like you're going to war with Mephisto's army. Crank it to 11 until your ears bleed. And you made it sound like an afternoon cup of tea in the garden. I want to hear those enemies scream when they die. Blah, blah. On the Sega, it sounds like you just gave it a little slap on the ass and told it to run along home.
Oh, fine then. Keep playing out of your garage for your one junkie friend and the ugly sweater girl with the fupa. I've got a line of groupies waiting for me once I finish my next set.
Alright, take it easy guys. We still got more topics before you kill each other. The original Turbo recordings is where my nostalgia lies, as that's how I played it. I love that raw sound and loud effects. There's no playing Lords without having it cranked to 11. That's what the game's about. But I have to be fair here and see both sides. There's a lot of folks who prefer the Sega tracks, and I can't fault them. They sound cleaner, less harsh, and with more mid-range and bass, even if it's not what I'm used to. At the end of the day, the music is phenomenal on both, and it wouldn't be impartial of me to choose one over the other. The Sega tracks are great for those that prefer a more produced sound. The sound effects are a different matter, as they're just missing in many cases on the Sega CD. Those guttural screams from earlier when large enemies die are really cool on the Turbo, and mostly missing on the Sega version. And when you do hear it occasionally, it sounds kinda wuss and low-key. Some bosses are missing their maniacal laugh as well after their transformation. Here it is on the Turbo. It's completely missing on the Sega CD version. So in the case of the music, this battle starts out with a draw. You've heard the comparisons and will clearly prefer one over the other. Now the sound effects on the Turbo are clearly better and more prominent, but that also means you have to crank the volume to hear the music better. So again, it kind of comes down to a matter of preference. But then again, who listens to metal quietly anyway? Alright, so let's move on to the graphics, where there's a ton of differences to show you. All kinds of little details and differences in the levels that I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else. So this should be pretty fun. Seeing them side by side, clearly they look different, but not in a way that easily elevates one over the other. The Sega CD version has more defined pixels in the image that you can clearly see, and some will prefer that sharper pixelated look. On the Turbo, you get a smoother, more processed image where it looks like they used a rudimentary form of anti-aliasing to blend pixel edges. You can clearly see that here, looking at the backgrounds and the snow, or the horizon and the clouds here, with a distinct difference where it looks blended on the Turbo versus defined on the Sega. But what's actually different or missing between the games for unknown reasons is what I want to show you next. One obvious example is the water stage, which has a good few effects missing on the Sega CD. Notice the water here on the Turbo and how it splashes as you walk through it, and the larger splash when you enter and exit the water. Really cool little detail. On the Sega CD, it's just a blue background that doesn't get interacted with in any way. Next is the really cool speed section with the bubbles that follows, at least on the Turbo. It runs on all cylinders without a hiccup or any slowdown that I ever noticed. Now compare that here on the Sega CD, where there's a significant slowdown as it tries to keep up with everything happening on screen. It looks like it tries to throw extra bubbles in there versus the Turbo version, but in the process starts to chug a bit in parts. Hey Sega, where was your blast processing on that one, huh?
You're too slow!
The perplexing part is this is a very rare occurrence, as I didn't notice it almost any other time in the game on the Sega CD. It runs great overall, and this was an outlier, which made it stand out even more. After the bubble section, you have another major miss as you emerge from the water. Here on the turbo version, you can see the water level subside, making way for dry land. It's a cool effect, and one inexplicably missing from the Sega CD version, shown here where you simply emerge as if you were never underwater in the first place, as if the water just ends. The turbo version takes this particular stage, bar none. Moving on to Bosk, the forest stage. Both games have the animated bubbles in the swamp, but if you look closer, you'll see the backgrounds scroll completely different. On the turbo, you'll see that the foreground with the swamp is one plane, and the forest on the background between the trees has its own scrolling plane, which looks natural. But on the Sega CD version, the forest and background is completely static. What is scrolling instead is the green swamp on its own plane, moving differently from the ground right next to it. It creates kind of an odd effect where the swamp looks like it's flowing, but in an odd way. Again, one of these weird changes that I'm pointing out that I happen to notice, but is just different versus really better or worse. Another change where after defeating the mid-boss here, not much else happens on the Sega CD. The screen goes black with just a hint of rain, and almost no waves of enemies follow until you reach the next section, almost like it's loading up the next area. Contrast that with the turbo, where immediately after killing the mid-boss, you're accosted by a few of these magicians, as well as other waves of enemies, and there's never any long black transition between here and the next phase of the level. It feels more natural, and I'm not sure why that changed here on the Sega CD, unless it had memory limitations and needed to load up the next area. In Cielum, or what I like to call the sky or floating island stage, the levels are pretty identical right down to the multiple scrolling layers of the horizon. Aside from the slightly more colorful and detailed clouds here on the turbo, both games look very close. Cielum is one of my favorite stages, and the Sega faithfully reproduces it. And check this out for a reversal of fortune. The boss here has some really cool scrolling clouds, as if the developers were having an extra coffee day and went that extra mile. On the Turbo Original, you just have a static background with no movement at all. Bonus points for Sega. The Turbo version certainly did this on the Azul water stage, so not sure why the background is static on this one. The desert stage. Look at all that animation in the water in the background here on the Turbo. So much attention to detail for a game of that time. You can even see the snakes moving through the water until they emerge from the background. Now check out the Sega CD version. Completely static. All that animation is gone. Why? Lazy or limited development time? Perhaps, as I'm sure the hardware was capable of it. I'm nitpicking here, of course, just bringing up these odd random bits that I immediately noticed while playing. Overall, the Sega CD is an impressive package, and I wouldn't fault its graphics or presentation one bit, aside from these differences here and there. Now here's a stage where the roles are reversed, the fire level, and the Sega CD version comes out on top. Check out the cool scrolling layers in the sky at the top of this volcano, which the Turbo version didn't implement. Most of the remaining level is the same, but then check out this cool fire effect on the lava for the boss. The Turbo version, again, is just a static background, so another bonus point for Sega on doing this stage boss justice. The ice stages are also very similar, and although the Sega has that signature grainier look compared with the smoother Turbo, some of the scrolling layers are more refined on the Sega CD. See how these stalactites are clearly defined from the black background? Now look at the Turbo version where you see that same layer superimposed onto another layer of a lighter color from the background, so it looks less natural. But this last section here, both systems do a great job with many layers of scrolling, and while they look slightly different, both are implemented well and there's no nitpicking to be had. The boss has a cool little screen shake effect that they added on the Sega CD that the Turbo doesn't have. The final level is pretty similar aside from a difference during the giant spiked ball section. On the Turbo, once you defeat the mid-boss and start moving backwards, the background and castle continues, and you see the windows and the outside. On the Sega CD, the background ends, and you end up dodging the spiked balls in darkness with a black background for a moment, until it fades in and then looks very similar to the Turbo. Not sure if it was a memory issue so the Sega needs to load the next area, kind of like on the Bosk stage, or if it was a stylistic choice, but it was something to note. It does, however, have a cool effect at the very end of the game after defeating the end boss, something they added that the Turbo version doesn't have. Speaking of the end stage though, an egregious change that makes no sense to me is the change in music. On the Turbo, the final level is a unique track and sounds pretty awesome. Check it out. Now on the Sega CD, for some odd reason, this track was completely removed, and instead it replays the same, or maybe a remixed version, of the forest stage. Now I love that track, it's likely my favorite one, it rocks hard, but why reuse it on the final level and remove the original song completely? Maybe they forgot to re-record that one and were like,
Oh, well, we already packed up all the gear, mate, and the drummer's already at the airport. How about we just throw in another tune, call it a day, yeah?
Another minor change I noticed on the final stage are these torches here. On the Turbo, they explode into bullets that rain down on you when destroyed, so I try to avoid blowing them up. On the Sega CD, they're just background fodder and don't really create any bullets to dodge when destroyed, so go ahead and blow them up. Maybe on the harder mode they actually do, but I didn't replay it all over just to check. To be honest, if I had to give a slight edge to either system in the graphics department, it could possibly be the Turbo, simply because it's a bit more colorful and has a less grainy look, but others may prefer that sharper pixelated image on the Sega CD. Sure, there are quite a few effects I went over that are missing on the Sega version, but then they also make up for it in a couple other areas with some cool parallax scrolling the Turbo didn't do. So just like the music, it really comes down to personal taste, and the graphics are too close to call. As you can see, they're different and there are changes, but to clearly call one superior to another would be nitpicking. Both games are great to look at, and I wouldn't kick either out of bed.
The biggest difference to me between these two ports isn't the music or the sound or the graphics, it's the gameplay and the difficulty. So first, let's see what Iggy and Ozzy have to say.
The Turbo version will kick your ass, man. It's not crazy hard, but it's a good challenge. And if I want to really get my ass kicked, I crank it up to super for the suicide bullets. I played the Sega version after, and it's like another cup of afternoon tea. What gives with making the games for babies to play? They could have just called it Lords of Kindergarten.
Oh, piss off. You know there's a difficulty setting, right? Not everyone lives in their mum's basement playing shoot-em-ups all night. The game is more accessible to people this way. If you're bent on getting wankered, there's a super mode for that. Why does a game have to kick you in the nuts to be good?
'Cause it's a shooter, bro. It's supposed to kick your ass. And if you say, shoot 'em up, one more time like that, I'm gonna kick you in the nuts. Your super mode doesn't even have suicide bullets. What's the point of that? And what's up with that stutter every time he gets hit? It's like he's curling into this ball of fear every time he gets punched in the face. What kind of a warrior is that?
Oh, piss off. Think what you want. I've got a fan to take care of the old gentleman sausage, yeah?
You know, I gotta go with Turbo Dude on this one. Lords of Thunder was never a brutally hard game to begin with, and was a perfect difficulty for most gamers. The game is just way too easy on the Sega CD, and the game wasn't even hard enough to begin with to need a nerfing of difficulty. Your weapon is weaker, so it makes it seem like the enemies are stronger. In fact, when I first started playing, I couldn't figure out why my usually powerful earth bombs did so little damage, and took far longer to kill large enemies. I was starting to think they made it tougher in some aspects, but that idea was short-lived. What the game wants you to do is get good with your sword, as it's insanely powerful on the Sega CD. I can't exaggerate how overpowered it is, and how quickly it takes down even the largest of enemies. So your armor shot is for all the smaller enemies, and the sword is for big bads and bosses. which would actually be a cool gameplay element had it been implemented completely. The problem is that your health and power is too robust, and on top of that you have a moment of invincibility after getting hit. You can truly play like an ass, as I'm demonstrating here, and get hit repeatedly, and still maintain enough health and power to make it through the level. The power-ups and health are generous, so you truly have to suck to not run this game fairly quickly on the default difficulty. Check out how I just kamikaze this final stage guardian. It's like it wasn't even there, and I barely took any damage. Now, watch me try the same thing on the turbo, and how it absolutely wrecks me. Sure, I finished it off, but with literally one sliver of life remaining, and then having to die on the stage boss and burn a continue, killing the opportunity for a deathless run. The final end bosses are pretty much a pushover, with the same strategy. It really feels like playing on very easy mode. You can rush into any large enemy or boss, and just unleash with your sword to take it down well before they ever deplete your health bar very much. Again, watch me try that tactic on the turbo end boss. Not happening. Almost killed me, and I had to back off and actually fight it properly and dodge its attacks to defeat it. The turbo version has no moment of invincibility, so you'll repeatedly lose health in moments by simply rushing into an enemy. The difficulty on the turbo version is perfectly balanced by comparison, and forces you to at least get competent with the game to defeat it. This is where the original turbo really outshines the Sega CD version as just a better overall gaming experience, and something that, if left intact on the Sega CD, would have made the Sega version stand toe-to-toe with the turbo as one of the coolest shooters on the system. Gameplay and difficulty goes to the TurboGrafx. You'll notice I haven't really mentioned the cutscenes, as they're virtually identical to each other. Wait a minute, you say, the Sega CD version has voiceovers in the cutscenes, and the Turbo does not. Actually, the original PC Engine Winds of Thunder also has voiceovers, as well as that sexy voice for the shopkeep lady. It's only the US release that removed them. I personally prefer it that way, as the images tell the story just fine, and the voices take away from the cool tunes, at least for me. Of course, I'd have been happy if they kept the sexy voice for the shopkeep.
May I help you?
That being said, the Sega CD version is definitely a competent port, especially from the music and the graphics department. If they had gone and tried to be more faithful to the gameplay of the original, it would absolutely be a knockout, and I don't know why they didn't. As it stands, the Sega CD port is a great looking, incredible sounding, but somewhat unbalanced gameplay experience compared to the original on the Turbo Duo. If you're still here with me up to this point and you're enjoying the video, then I've got a special treat for you. Something that's only available on the Turbo Duo version, and I think you'll enjoy it. That's the super hard mode with suicide bullets. So check out some killer gameplay, and I hope you enjoy.
What do you like about Lords of Thunder?
Lyrics.
The lyrics?
Huh? You need practice, alright? Practice, practice, practice.
That's it for my very first head-to-head video, but I've got a whole lot more planned, some really cool games and ports to compare. So if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. These videos are a lot of work, but I really enjoy them, and if you do too, I'd like you to be able to enjoy them as well. If you're new to my channel and you got here because you're a big fan of the TurboGrafx or the PC Engine and you haven't seen my PC Engine mini reviews yet, definitely check them out right here. Very detailed, in-depth, not like anything else you've seen on YouTube. I highly recommend to check them out.
All right, get this free t-shirt when you buy Lords of Thunder now.
Yeah!